The moment that ruined my life didn't feel important. That's what still haunts me. There was no drama. No raised voices. No sense that I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. It felt small, almost forgettable. A choice made casually, the kind you assume you can always correct later. I didn't know I was closing a door. I thought I was just postponing it. People talk about turning points as if they announce themselves. As if the air changes, as if your instincts scream, this matters. Mine didn't. My instincts were quiet that day. Reasonable. Calm. That's why I trusted them. I remember thinking, this is easier. I'll deal with the rest later. Later became my life. At the time, I believed my future was flexible. I believed that paths stayed open just because they once existed. I didn't understand that some doors don't slam, they drift shut silently, and by the time you notice, you're already locked inside something else. The choice itself was ordinary. So ordinary I hesitate to even describe it, because it sounds ridiculous compared to what it cost me. It wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't even cowardice in an obvious way. It was convenience. I chose the option that required less explanation. Less resistance. Less immediate discomfort. I told myself I was being practical. Sensible. Mature. I had no idea how dangerous practicality can be when it's used to silence your inner voice. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. My life continued. In some ways, it even improved. There was stability. Approval. Predictability. All the things people say you're supposed to want. That early success fooled me. It made me believe I had chosen wisely. That the uneasy feeling I sometimes had was just nostalgia for a road not taken, something harmless, something everyone experiences. So I ignored it. I didn't realize I was training myself to ignore something much deeper. Over time, that original choice began to harden. Not abruptly, gradually, like wet cement settling. New commitments formed around it. Relationships adjusted. Expectations aligned. My identity reorganized itself to make the decision look inevitable in hindsight. That's another cruel trick of time, it edits your past to justify your present. I stopped imagining alternatives because they felt unrealistic now. I told myself that wanting something else would be irresponsible. That revisiting old possibilities meant I wasn't grateful enough for what I had. Gratitude became a weapon I used against myself. Whenever doubt surfaced, I crushed it with logic. Look how lucky you are. Look how much worse it could be. Look how many people would trade places with you. Those arguments were effective and lethal. Because they didn't make me happier. They made me quieter. Years passed without leaving a strong impression. Days blended into routines. I was productive, dependable, and increasingly detached from the person I used to imagine becoming. I noticed the change only in hindsight. At the time, it felt like adulthood. I stopped feeling anticipation. Not anxiety, anticipation. The sense that something ahead might surprise me. The future stopped feeling open and started feeling scheduled. I didn't panic. I adapted. That's what scares me most when I look back, how easily I adapted to a life that wasn't aligned with me. How quickly I accepted a version of myself that fit circumstances better than it fit my soul. Every so often, a memory of the other path would surface. A reminder of who I might have been. It didn't come with longing at first, just a strange ache, like recognizing a face you almost remember. I told myself it was normal. Everyone sacrifices something. Everyone compromises. That's what being realistic means. But realism, when overused, becomes resignation. The first real crack appeared years later, during a moment that should have felt satisfying. I had achieved something I once thought would make me proud. People congratulated me. I smiled, thanked them, and felt nothing. Not emptiness. Worse. Disconnection. It was as if the achievement belonged to someone else. As if I had followed instructions correctly but missed the point entirely. That night, I lay awake and replayed my life backward, searching for the moment where things veered. That's when I found it, that small, forgettable choice I had never revisited. The one I assumed I could undo. I realized something terrifying then. I hadn't been unlucky. I hadn't been forced. I hadn't been misled. I had chosen. And the choice had worked exactly as intended, just not in the way I had hoped. The life I was living made sense on paper. It was coherent. Logical. Defensible. It just wasn't mine anymore. That realization didn't come with panic. It came with grief, slow, heavy, suffocating grief for a life that hadn't been taken from me, but gently traded away while I wasn't paying attention. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because every day after that choice wasn't neutral. It was confirmation. I didn't know yet whether this realization would destroy me or save me. I only knew that pretending it didn't exist was no longer possible. The small choice I barely remembered had grown roots. And my entire life was built on top of it. Once I recognized that moment for what it was, I couldn't stop seeing its fingerprints everywhere. Every routine. Every relationship. Every assumption about who I was supposed to be traced back to that single, quiet decision I had made without ceremony. It was like discovering a hairline crack in the foundation of a house you've lived in for years, one that explains every creak, every draft, every unexplained imbalance. The house is still standing. But now you know why it never quite felt safe. The most painful part wasn't the loss of the other life. It was the realization that I had actively protected this one from being questioned. I had defended my choice not because it was right, but because admitting it was wrong would collapse everything built on top of it. That's the real trap of long-term regret. It doesn't scream at you. It negotiates. It tells you it's too late. That changing now would be reckless. That you've already invested too much. That people depend on you being consistent, even if that consistency is slowly killing you. I listened. I began to feel a constant internal tension, like holding a breath I didn't know how to release. On the surface, my life remained orderly. Internally, it became crowded with unspoken questions and unresolved grief. I started measuring time differently. Not in years or milestones, but in missed exits. Moments when I could have pivoted and didn't. Each one reinforced the sense that the original choice wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern I kept honoring. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself that adulthood meant living with consequences instead of chasing fantasies. That regret was something you accepted quietly, like aging or gravity. But acceptance started to feel like surrender. There were days when the weight of it all became physical. A heaviness in my chest. A fatigue that no amount of rest addressed. I wasn't burned out from effort, I was burned out from misalignment. I noticed how often I said it's fine without checking whether it was true. How reflexive my compliance had become. How easily I defaulted to what was expected instead of what felt honest. I wasn't living reactively. I was living defensively. The breakdown didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived as clarity. One evening, I was alone, doing something mindless, and a thought surfaced without warning: if nothing changes, this is how my life will end. Not in tragedy. Not in crisis. In quiet continuation. That thought terrified me more than failure ever had. I realized I had been waiting for a sign that it wasn't too late, but time doesn't give signs. It gives momentum. And my momentum was carrying me further away from myself with each passing year. Still, the fear of change was immense. If I acknowledged that the small choice had ruined my life, what did that say about me? That I was careless, weak, short-sighted, worse, that I had known, on some level, and chosen convenience anyway. That shame kept me stuck longer than doubt ever could. I tried to renegotiate with reality. I told myself I could adjust within the life I had. Reframe it. Find meaning around the edges. That not every life needs to feel authentic, some just need to be stable. But the more I tried to settle, the louder the discomfort became. Because deep down, I wasn't grieving ambition or excitement. I was grieving agency. The knowledge that my life was the result of drift, not decision. The realization sharpened into something unbearable. I had mistaken ease for wisdom. And that mistake had quietly directed decades of my life. I began to feel like a fraud, not to others, but to myself. Every plan I made felt provisional. Every future projection felt dishonest. I was building forward while secretly wishing to undo something fundamental behind me. That split exhausted me. I started to imagine what it would mean to step away from the life I had chosen. Not dramatically. Not irresponsibly. Just, honestly. To admit that I had made a small choice that turned out to be wrong, and that living with that truth mattered more than preserving appearances. But honesty has consequences. It would mean disrupting people who relied on my predictability. It would mean dismantling structures that had grown comfortable around me. It would mean admitting that I had spent years being faithful to a decision that no longer deserved my loyalty. Worst of all, it would mean confronting the possibility that I might change everything and still not recover what I had lost. That possibility haunted me. What if I tore my life apart and discovered that the other path no longer existed, that the person I might have been had already aged out of possibility, that all this pain would lead only to a different kind of regret? That fear kept me frozen. I stood between two unbearable truths: stay, and live a life that made sense but felt empty. Leave, and risk confirming that the damage was irreversible. The small choice had grown into a prison, not because it was catastrophic, but because it was defendable. Reasonable. Understandable. No one would blame me for staying. That was the problem. I realized then that the most dangerous regrets are the ones you can justify. The ones that don't look like mistakes from the outside. The ones that let you disappear politely, without ever forcing a reckoning. But something inside me was reaching its limit. The numbness I had adapted to began to crack. Emotions leaked through unexpectedly: irritation, sadness, flashes of anger that felt disproportionate because they had been suppressed for so long. I could feel a breaking point approaching. Not explosive, but decisive. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew that continuing as if the small choice didn't matter was no longer an option. Because it mattered. It had mattered every single day since I made it. And whether I acted or not, the reckoning was already here. I didn't undo my life. I don't think that's possible. What I did was stop pretending that the small choice didn't matter. That happened on an ordinary morning. No deadline. No argument. No external push. I was sitting alone, staring at nothing in particular, when I felt a quiet but absolute certainty settle in me: if I continue like this, I will live out the rest of my days as a justification. Not a person. A justification. That thought cut deeper than fear ever had. I realized that for years I had been asking the wrong question. I kept asking, can I fix this? Is it too late? Will it be worth it? Those questions kept me frozen because they demanded guarantees life doesn't offer. The real question was simpler and harder. Can I continue living a life I no longer consent to? Once I framed it that way, the answer was immediate. No. The decision that followed wasn't heroic. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't redeem the years I had already lost. What it did was interrupt the pattern. I stopped defending the old choice. That alone felt like stepping into open air after years underground. I didn't rush to change everything. I didn't announce reinvention. I simply withdrew my loyalty from a decision that no longer represented me. That withdrawal had consequences. People were confused. Some felt misled. Others disappointed. A few were angry, not because I was hurting them, but because my honesty forced them to reevaluate the version of me they had built expectations around. I accepted that discomfort. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to be the source of disruption in my own life. The grief came next. Not all at once, but steadily. Grief for the years I had lived on autopilot. For the opportunities one had rationalized away. For the person I might have become if I had trusted my inner hesitation instead of silencing it with logic. That grief didn't destroy me. It grounded me. Because it proved that I was still connected to myself. I didn't chase the other life I once imagined. That door, I learned, doesn't reopen the way nostalgia promises. Instead, I began asking smaller, more honest questions. What feels true today? What am I doing out of habit rather than conviction? Where am I still choosing ease over alignment? Those questions reshaped my days more than any dramatic leap ever could. The life I live now doesn't look like redemption. It looks like participation. I feel my days again. I feel the friction of choice. I feel the weight of responsibility, not the imposed kind, but the kind that comes from authorship. Some regrets remain. They always will. I regret believing that small choices are harmless. I regret trusting convenience over intuition. I regret how long I defended a life that required me to disappear inside it. But regret has changed its role. It no longer punishes me. It informs me. It reminds me that neutrality is not safety. That silence is a decision. That drifting is still a direction, just one you didn't consciously choose. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own small choice, the one you barely remember but keep circling back to, I want to tell you it's easy to face it. It isn't. But I will tell you this, you don't have to relive the past to reclaim yourself. You don't have to erase your life to regain authorship. You don't even have to be certain. You only have to stop lying to yourself about what you already know. The small choice that ruined my life didn't destroy me in a single moment. It shaped me through thousands of quiet confirmations. What saved me wasn't reversing it, it was refusing to keep confirming it. That's the difference between regret that buries you and regret that wakes you up. I can't reclaim the life that choice cost me. But I can live the rest of my life without betraying myself again. And that, finally, feels like coming back.